In this video, we will be discussing on summarization concept in EIGRP. So mostly we'll be verifying practically how exactly summarization is done in EIGRP protocol, and later on we'll also go and verify the summarization process in RIP and other protocols as well. So to practically verify, I have a scenario where I got three routers. I got a router 1 using the default networks 10 dot and 1 dot network in the LAN and the WAN. I got the LAN and WAN networks here. So on the router 3, I'm using some extra logical interfaces. We call them as loopback interfaces. And the first step, I'm going to do the basic advertisements where I'm going to advertise all the routers, whatever the interfaces I have in the diagram. I'm going to advertise them in EIGRP 100. Okay, and after that, what we are going to do is we are going to verify how these routes gets advertised, and then maybe auto summary also will verify, and then we'll also see how to configure manual summarization as well. Okay, so let's get started here. So I got my console screens. I got three routers started here. Router 1, and if you go and verify, the routers have the default IP addressing as per the diagram on all the three routers. Show IP interface brief. And if I use show IP protocols, I don't have any of the routing protocol configured. So the basic setup is ready, connectivity and the IP addressing is done on all the three routers. And if you verify router 3 as well, I got all the IP addressing pre-configured as per my diagram. So let us do the basic advertisement starting from router 1. I'm going to say router EIGRP 100, and then I'm going to say network 10 dot network in the LAN and 1 dot network in the WAN. So I just got only two networks, 10 and 1, and then I'm going to router 2. On the router 2 as well, I'm going to say router EIGRP 100, network 20 dot network in the LAN, 2 dot network and 1 dot network in the WAN. So let's go to router 3 and finish up the configuration. On the router 3, I'm going to say router EIGRP 100, and I'm going to advertise the 30 dot network in the LAN and 2 dot network in the WAN, and then I'm using 13 dot network on the loopback interfaces. Now I can see the neighborship is up. So the basic step whenever you configure any routing protocols, so we verify the neighbors. On the router 2, I can see router 1 and router 3 neighborship is established. And if I verify the routes, if I use show IP route, or if you want to be more specific, we can use show IP route EIGRP. You can see I'm able to see the routes coming from router 3, 30 dot network. I'm able to see 13 dot network, and 20 dot network and 2 dot networks are coming from router 2. You can see all the routes. But one thing, if you observe here on the router 3, you can see this network coming as /8. What's the reason? If you remember, I discussed in our basic summarization classes that EIGRP and RIP version 2 are the two protocols which will do auto summary by default. So here what is happening, the router 3, when it is advertising the routes to router 2, it is going to advertise as individual routes. But when the router 2 receives and sends it back to router 1, because it sees that these networks are contiguous, so it's belong to the same major network called 13, it is going to advertise that as 10.000/8, because that is a default network ID with a default slash value. So let's go and verify on the router 2. So on the router 2, if I verify show IP route EIGRP, you can see router 3 is also receiving the routes as 13.000/8. So which means here, in fact, actually what is happening here is router 3, when it is advertising these networks to router 2, it's going to advertise to the default summary. That's what auto summary. And then again, router 1 is also receiving as 13.000/8. Okay, so if you go and check on the router 3, so let's go to router 3 here. On the router 3, if I use show IP route EIGRP, now whichever the router doing summarization, now in this example, so whenever we do manual or auto summarization, except in RIP, So by default, the router whichever is doing the summarization, that is router 3 is doing summarization here, you will see one route is added to the summary route. You can see this summary route is added, and this summary route is pointed towards the null zero interface. Now what exactly it is going to do is, it is actually a loop prevention mechanism in EIGRP. It is going to ensure that there is no loops here. Okay, so the router 3 is doing summarization, and you'll see this summary null zero pointing towards null zero. Nothing but, let's say if a router 1 is actually trying to send traffic to something called some address, let's say 13.5.5.5. so what happens if a router 1 is trying to send a traffic to 13.5.5.5. so as of now we don't have any 13.5.5.5, but router 1 will see the routing table, and it says anything starting with 13, it has to go to 1.1.1.2, right? So because when I'm receiving the advertisements here, it's advertising that 13.000/8. If anything starting with 13.000/8, please advertise to me. Okay, so which means the router 3 will try to send to router 2. So if you try to trace 13.5.5.5, you can see it goes to router 2 and goes to router 2. Router 2 sends to router 3 because it is having the summary route, and then finally router 3 is going to drop. So router 3, what it is going to do is, it says if any network come for 13.001, 002, 0.1.1, 2, 3, it is going to send to the respective interfaces. Because if you see here, show IP route connected, the router 3 is having information about these 4 networks, and any network other than this, because when you are doing summarization, it's going to include all the addresses starting with 13.xxx, because we are writing /8. so if any network coming beyond this, it will be automatically routed to null zero. So let's say if any packet is coming from 13.0.1.1, it will send out on this interface. If any packets come for 13.000, it will send on this interface. And anything other than this range, it will be automatically routed to this null interface. So this is actually a loop prevention mechanism in OSPF and EIGRP protocols. But again, this mechanism is not present in RIP again. Okay, so if you want to practically verify this behavior of this one, what we can do is I can just create one ACL. Let's say I'll go to router 3. I'll create one ACL just for verification, not really required. I'm going to create one ACL with, it's going to say any traffic coming from 1.1.1.1, that is from router 1 going to 13.5.5.5. it's 13, sorry, access list 100. I need to say deny. I just got the syntax. So deny IP traffic coming from 1.1.1.1 going to 13.5.5.5. so actually I'm enabling the debug for this, debug IPICMP, and I'm going to enable the debug only for ACL 100. So let me just enable for on the router 3. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to ping from router 1. If I try to ping to 13.5.5.5, and anyway 13.5.5.5 is not present, now we'll see there is a destination, there is a packet coming for 13.5.5.5. its unreachable message is sent to 1.1.1.1. in fact, I should see this kind of output here. Okay, so actually I just forgot to enable this debug IP packet. So what I'm doing is, if you remember, I created an access list 100, which is going to match the traffic coming from router 1 to 13. Sorry, it's not 13, it's, I just wrote the wrong ACL. So access list 100 deny, sorry, it's not deny, actually it has to permit IP host 1.1.1.1 and then going to 13.5.5.5, or you can write any destination, okay, or any, simply you can write any also, 13.5.5.5. okay. And then I'm going to enable the debug IP packet. I'm going to enable the debug IP packet for ACL 100, which means any traffic coming for this, it will show the debug output, and then I'm going to debug ICMP here. So now when I try to generate the traffic for 13.5.5.5, I'm not able to reach because there is no network with 13.5.5.5, but you'll see here, whenever you generate any ping message from this source going to 5. Network, it will be routed via null zero interface. Now this is actually a loop prevention mechanism, because whenever you do summarization, if you remember, we also discussed that even if you are doing manual summarization, if I'm summarizing with 13.00/20, probably you may include some networks which may not be present in your network. So that's the reason, if any packet is destined for that particular network which is not present, then the router will if the router is having some default route somewhere, it will be routed to the default route or routed to somewhere, and then there is a possibility of loops. So to overcome that, this is the default behavior. So you don't really need to do anything, all these things, debug and all the stuff. Just you need to understand that whenever you configure summarization, or any router which is doing summarization will have a route pointing towards the summary address. In this example, it is manual summarization, sorry, auto summarization. So it will be /8 pointing towards null zero. So which means if any traffic destined for any network other than what is present, it will be routed to null zero interface, which means nothing but it will be dropped. Simply it will be dropped. So null zero, nothing but there is no interface, it's simply dropped automatically. Okay, so by default it is doing auto summary. So here I just did only one thing, I just did the advertisements, and that's it. The router 3 is doing automatically auto summary. Now what I'll do is I'll go to router 2 or any other router, I'll disable the auto summarization. So I'm going to disable the auto summary on the router 3 or on all the routers. Okay, anyway, here we are verifying the summarization on the router 3 part. So I'll go and disable router EIGRP 100. There is a command called no auto summary. So when I give no auto summary, what router 3 will do? Router 3 says, okay, I should advertise the networks individually without any summarization. So if you want, you can go to router 2 and router 1 also you can do, but here I'm not doing. Let's go to router 2 also, because if you don't disable on the router 2, what happens is the router 3 will disable the summarization, but router 2, when it sends to router 1, again it will do auto summary. So which we don't want. We just want to ensure that all the routes, when they get advertised between the routers, they should be seen as individual routes. Okay, so now what is happening here? So I just did no auto summary on all the routers. I disable auto summary, no auto summary. Now let us go to router 2 and router 1 to verify the routing table. If I give show IP route EIGRP, now the router 3 is going to advertise all the routes as individual routes. You can see router 3 advertises to router 2, and if I go and check on the router 1, if I give show IP route EIGRP, I can see all the 13 node networks will be seen as individual routes. So if I disable auto summary, again the problem is you get a big routing table. Anyway, in this example I don't have a very huge number of networks. Assume that instead of 4 networks it is 40 networks, and I don't want the router 3 to advertise them as such a big network. At the same time, I don't want to use auto summary. So I don't want to advertise individual I don't want, and also I don't want to use auto summary. So the alternate option we have is we can actually use manual summarization. So the first step, whenever you want to do manual summarization, first you have to figure out what will be the summary address if you combine this. So that is something done based on the calculation. So I expect you to know the calculation process which we discussed previously. So this is what you get: summary address 13.00/22. Now what I want is, I want router 3, when it advertises to router 2, it should send as 13.000/22. So to implement summarization, the first thing we need to know the exact interface. Now, if you want to implement EIGRP summarization, it is done on the interface level. So now we need to figure out what interface facing towards router 2. We need to get into that interface, and then we need to say interface S1 by 0. Under the interface mode, we need to say IP summary address. And then if you use question mark, you'll find some options like EIGRP 100. We need to tell what is the protocol we are using, and then what is the summary address 13.0.0.0, and what is the summary mask. Summary mask is /22, so it will be 255.255.252.0, the equivalent subnet mask for the /22. So which means I'm saying that anything going on this interface or advertised on this interface, it should get advertised as with this network ID with this subnet mask information. So we need to know the exact interface. Remember, if you implement on a wrong interface, it's not going to work. Let's say by mistake you configured on some other interface S0 by 1, which is nowhere, or maybe it is going on some different routers, so it will not work. So knowing the exact interface and the direction is very important when you are practically implementing the summarization. So most of the configurations will be single line, but you need to know on which router to implement and which interface to implement. That is the most important thing. Let's go to router 3 and verify. Actually, we verified. Let's go and configure on the router 3 interface. So interface S1 by 0, the interface which is facing between 3 to 2. I need to say IP summary address. Just use question marks. You'll find the options EIGRP. Again question mark, asking the autonomous system number 100 I'm using, and what is the summary address. Summary address after calculation is 13.0.0.0, and it is asking what is the summary mask. Summary mask is /22, so 255.255.252.0. Done. Now if you go and verify on the router 2, I should see the routes not as individual, but it has to be summary address. So let's say show IP route EIGRP. Now we can see the router 2 is receiving 13.0.0.0/22 with summary address, and then coming from this interface. So when the router 3 is advertising, it is advertising with a /32 subnet mask, /22 subnet mask. Okay, so similar way, the same will be advertised to router 1 as well. The router 1 also will receive the same summary mask. Let's say in case if you have a requirement where router 3 should advertise to router 2 as individual and router 2 should advertise as a summary mask, then you have to configure on this interface. So it's all about how what is exact your requirement and which interface you want to send them as summary address. Okay, so the configuration is very simple. You just need to go to the interface and you need to know the exact interface. So if you are doing RIP summarization, let's say it's going to be the same command. We just need to say IP summary address, and then we need to say RIP, and then we need to say summary address and the subnet mask. So it's going to be no different in RIP configurations. The behavior will be different, only the command will vary. And if I go and check on the router 3, if I go and check, if I give show IP route EIGRP, you can see it is going to create a summary route pointing towards the null interface. Okay, so nothing but if any other networks which is not present in my routing table or router 3 routing table as connected interface or in routing table, it's going to simply discard those packets.